thank you to everyone who came on Saturday to the Reclaiming Intimacy workshop. Camilla Jones is a sex therapist here in Atlanta, and she did such a good job at breaking down basically the fundamentals of what it takes to feel intimate and connected and warm and loved and turned on with your partner despite having chronic pain and illness, because there's a lot that goes into physical touch and living with a body in pain. So if you want the replay to that, check the link in the show notes. And of course, if you are in my membership, which is $17 a month, you get all access to all recordings for free as a part of your monthly membership. And now here's my interview with Miranda Campbell about attachment styles and chronic pain and illness. The Chronic Illness Therapist podcast is meant to be a place where people with chronic illnesses can come to feel heard, seen, and safe while listening to mental health therapists and other medical professionals talk about the realities of treating difficult conditions. This might be a new concept for you, one in which you never have to worry about someone inferring that it's all in your head. We dive deep into the human side of treating complex medical conditions and help you find professionals that leave you feeling hopeful for the future. I hope you love what you learn here, and please consider leaving a review or sharing this podcast with someone you love. This podcast is meant for educational purposes only. For specific questions related to your unique circumstances, please contact a licensed medical professional in your state of residence. Miranda Campbell is a licensed clinical social worker and attachment trauma therapist with over a decade of experience in helping individuals heal from relational trauma and foster secure, healthy relationships. She combines attachment-based therapy with innovative techniques like brain spotting to guide clients in understanding and transforming their attachment styles. With a compassionate, trauma-sensitive approach, Miranda supports clients navigating complex relationship challenges, attachment wounds, and emotional regulation, empowering them to build meaningful connections and achieve emotional resilience. As an experienced therapist, she has successfully developed tools, including the attachment style audit, widely used by individuals seeking deeper self-awareness in relationships. Her recent book, The Attachment Style Makeover, has also garnered attention for its practical, relatable approach to understanding attachment styles. I personally have read Miranda's book, and I think that if you are looking for something that is easy to understand and really insightful, that will give you a deeper look into how and why people act the way they act, and then what to do about that from a place of growth and understanding and relational health, her book is one that you want to get for sure. Tell me a little bit about your book, The Attachment Makeover. So tell me about the name, the title, what drove you to that title, and how that encompasses what you talk about in the book.
Yeah, I think it's really important to just recognize that attachment styles aren't fixed. They aren't set in stone. There's such thing as we call earned secure attachment. And, I think Makeover explains that in a way. And then I also co-authored it with my therapist bestie, Jessica Harris, who is a phenomenal therapist. She's all about attachment, relationships, especially that relationship you have with yourself, your body, your relationship with food. And she's also a professional makeup artist. So it just seemed like aligned with us and our brands and stuff. So,
that's awesome. I didn't know that about her. That's really cool. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that concept, because a lot of people listening to this podcast, struggling with chronic illness, and sometimes the chronic illness has been there their whole life. And it's like, they get their diagnosis as an adult, sometimes it's like, yeah, I kind of knew this was always here, but I'm just now getting this diagnosis. Or sometimes, they get sick overnight. Either way, there is a bit of a identity shift that starts to happen. And the way that I usually talk about attachment with clients is like, it usually has to do a lot with fear and how you were scared as a child. When you were scared as a child, however your caregivers responded to you is often kind of how you then respond to your chronic illness. And then the way that your attachment style is kind of plays into how you react as well. So curious your thoughts on that. And then also when we're talking about this makeover piece, like yeah, we can kind of go into what it's like to maybe start relating securely and things like that.
Yeah. I guess I see it twofold. And I'm sure you can relate, like, on topics that you are really like passionate about, like your mind goes 50 million directions all at once. Like, I can answer this way, this way. This is also true, you know, but I'll try to narrow it down to two. But what comes up for me in hearing you say that, I think about the fact that, like, yes, I said that our attachment styles are not set in stone. And like, there's things that we can do to kind of shift to more secure patterns, at least more secure patterns more often, especially. Um, and then there's also like space to just accepting, like, I'm anxiously or avoidantly or, you know, a combination of the two. I'm attached this way. Thus, I need to see this from the people I'm around or this in my relationships. How do I seek this thing out? So, for instance, if I'm anxiously attached and I had a chronic illness, I personally have migraines. So, when I have migraines, am I able to ask for help without feeling guilty, without feeling like I'm a burden? And if that's a pain point for me, then I might need to set it up with like my support, my caregiver, my partner, where we just have ways of communicating that don't activate that. For instance, this is telling on myself, but I am working on this. Sometimes it's hard. Like, I feel like I need to be like about, I don't know, I just feel like it needs to be debilitating before I ask for help, right? Or I feel like, I don't know, like I have to earn it or I have to like overcompensate, give back tenfold, you know? And that may result in me asking at the last minute. But what that has done is set me up to be, I don't know, set up this dynamic where it puts my partner or my support in kind of like panic mode where they have to like maybe logistically figure out, oh, let me change this meeting at work and da da da. But if I read that logistical part as like hesitation or as, oh, I'm being too much, I'm asking for too much, or I'm causing them too much trouble, like I'm reinforcing those attachment wounds. And so to shift to a more secure pattern in this dynamic, then I must act differently. Even if I don't feel secure, I still may feel anxious. I still may feel guilty. I still may have like this disproportionate worry about being a burden. However, I can choose to act secure by asking proactively, like, hey, I'm feeling a migraine coming on. I'll probably need help a little bit later. If you can leave work early, great. You know, then they have more ample time and room to make adjustments. And then I don't have that experience reinforcing those old attachment wounds. Like, it's just a game changer.
Yeah, full disclosure, I run very much the same way. And so I'm curious for you if you've also, I know for me, it's been like, as I kind of learned all of this and I'm learning over and over and over again how to kind of reach out for help, ask for help way before the thing I need. Um, it it felt like it often feels like I'm like stumbling over how to ask, what's the right way to ask. Like it feels so hard to figure out. I'm curious if you also experienced that in your journey.
I mean, yes and no. I think it comes in seasons, you know? I think it could be something where I feel like, okay, I got a handle on this. I've been having migraines since I've been 8. So like there's an element of this where I'm just used to needing to ask for help and to rely on people and just knowing like, hey, if this gets any worse, I'm going to be useless to everybody involved. I think it adds an extra element that now we have kids. So it's not like I can just lay down indefinitely until I feel better. I have little ones depending on me. So there's an element of like, oh, you have to push through, but then, oh no, this is getting bad. And I think it's seasons where maybe, let's say, for instance, I have this book release, right? And so things are already really busy. Perhaps my partner's already dealing with more than his fair share of tantrums and has to take the L and just like writing solo with the kids because I need to get this finished or I have deadlines to meet. And then if a migraine hits, then I feel doubly like bad. So I think it's more like situational now where I have, I'm usually comfortable if all things are well. But when things are a little bit more intense or things are a little less predictable or we're off our rhythm and then I need help, then I might be more inclined to excuse me, revert back to my anxious patterns.
Yeah, I think that was, yeah, I think we said it in two different ways, but it's like there are going to be certain situations in life where like
Mhm.
kind of find yourself maybe reverting back, which to me feels like stumbling, but it can feel different to everyone. I also feel like having kids really like upped that. Like, okay, you really have to ask differently. You really have to be proactive here, because like multiple people are relying on you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I always, you can correct, maybe you have a better way of explaining this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I always, when I'm talking about anxious attachment styles with clients, I like to explain it as anxious means we kind of move toward, and avoidant means we move away from conflict. That's just like my very watered down, simplified way of making it easy. Do you have a different way that you kind of simplify it and make it just like quickly digestible so people really can get away from like, wait, I'm anxiously attached. It means I have anxiety and it's this big disorder. And, how do you kind of explain that so it's more just easy to understand and digest?
Yeah, I really like yours. I may borrow it. Let me actually steal it. um, I think I narrow it down to what we fear. So, an avoidant person may fear the closeness and may not feel very safe. Like maybe times when they attempted to be avoidant, attempted to connect, it may have blown up in their face. That's not their safe place, right? Or for an anxiously attached person, they may fear that disconnection. They may be conditioned to fear a separation because it may result in abandonment. And so for a disorganized attached person, this kind of blends of both. They may at times fear closeness, even though they desperately want it. So it like kind of just looks like this push pull dynamic where it's a little bit less predictable about what you're going to get. So kind of sum it up in that way about what they fear.
I love that. Yeah. Do you talk in the book about that and kind of ways to start to navigate that?
Definitely. The book takes you through the process of really getting to know your attachment style. So while it's really important to recognize what attachment style you have, I really try to make it more accessible by just saying like, look, if you could at least have an entry point of knowing what your traits are, what your behaviors are, don't obsess about really like putting yourself cleanly into this box. Leave that to those who you're working with. Um, just so like I just would hate for someone to get so stuck that they never move towards the shifts that they need to make. And so like I think making it even the most simple is just recognizing whether you're secure or insecure, right? Or recognizing that like you may not, again, fit cleanly in that box. Do you tend to be more secure than not? Or do you tend to be more insecure than not? And then really understanding like what your fears are. We also kind of like depict just ways, um, relatable ways we use media like movies and books on like how you can kind of pick up on others attachment ones or attachment patterns. Sometimes it feels a lot more safe to think about it as somebody else before we, think internally. And there's so many like subtle signs that we see in media, moderate signs, severe signs. But I think my most favorite chapter is grieving the past or the relationships that we wish we would have had or could have had in our childhood. But from there, of course, we walk you through practical strategies to start shifting and chipping away at those patterns.
Yeah, can you say more about the grief topic around, yeah, what this?
Yeah. And working with the clients that I see, like we often get stuck on the past, on like, well, my parent didn't do this or they did that and it really impacted me and I can't talk to them about it. They become defensive or, it's hard to what I really think it boils down to, it's hard for us as humans to take ownership and accountability for the things that we may have dropped the ball on when we had reasonable reasons or explanations on why that happened. But I think healing comes from all parties recognizing that there's space for both. I understand that you did your absolute best. I may have done probably the same, maybe worse than you in that situation. However, it still impacted me in this way. And just being able to hold space for that. Holding space for like both, like there's a reason why our parents couldn't deliver what we really needed, while also like recognizing and acknowledging how it impacted us.
Yeah. You know, in undergrad, I had this professor, and she was like, it was a psychology professor, and you know, we're just young baby undergrad students. Like, we're not even anywhere near like grad school yet, nothing. And she was like, you know, the problem with y'all is that y'all had too high of expectations of your parents. We were like, what? Like, all of our traumas because of our parents. Don't talk that, like, don't diminish us. And it's funny because not funny. I mean, it's funny because I've done a lot of work around it, but it was not funny at the time. But it's like, yeah, okay, my parents did. Like, there were things that caused me heartache and trauma and never should have happened. And I can, as a fully functioning adult who's done a ton of work around this, really understand that like they both did the best they could. There was literally nothing they could have done differently given the circumstances that they were in. Not everyone can say that. I've definitely worked with people who are like, no, my parents had this and that like available to them, and they really chose not to. So I think that that's also accurate and true. But I think for a lot of us, again, like if you just look at their level of education or their level of emotional intelligence or their level of support or their level of finances or their level of like family trauma, like there's so many different things that impact that. And, a lot of our parents really just did the best that they could. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to hurt around that. It just means like when you're pointing the finger and saying like, it is your fault that I'm hurting. Yes. And hurt happens in this world. And now we have to figure out how we're going to move through it in a way that's good for us. Again, not to override like responsibility or anything like that. But, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things that was really important to us is to acknowledge that and how that looks in a cultural lens. And so for many of us in like a BIPOC community, our parents and their parents may not have had the privilege of really tending to their own emotional needs. They were burdened with survival. And so I feel like, I think I said this to a client yesterday, I feel like this generation, perhaps I'm an older millennial. So from millennials moving forward, and maybe some of the older, what is it, Gen Y, Gen X?
Gen X.
Older than us? Yeah. So I feel like we're like the first generation to kind of have the luxury, not all of us, but, more of us are being able to have the luxury to tend to the emotional needs of ourselves and starting to repair some of the generational trauma and wounds that we've experienced.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I'm thinking my brain is kind of going to, okay, having the option now to work through emotions, like, but meanwhile experiencing that intergenerational trauma, which leads to an insecurity. So we get to engage in this work, and then I am struggling with the question. Like, I'm curious how, because the way that I always frame things around healing and like learning is kind of like I said at the beginning. Like for me, there's a lot of stumbling involved in learning a lot of things, and to me, that's just become a part of the process. It doesn't feel like failure anymore. It's like now when I'm stumbling, I'm like, oh, I'm almost there, because like I can feel that that's how that works. And so I'm just kind of thinking about, okay, the generation before you, still massive, massive trauma. This is the first generation now that's finally able to start to kind of do some of that healing work. So I'm just wondering what that process feels like to you, and how you see that process helping you get to secure relating. Think timeline, struggles of doing it, like obstacles to doing it. Yeah, all of that.
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacle, like I said, like is in chapter 3 of grieving the attachment wound or the trauma or the things that like we would have, should have, could have experienced. I think that's a huge foundation in it. I think the biggest hurdle is that many of us face is that we might not get an apology. We might need to break up with this idea of what we could have, should have, should. We might need to break up with the idea that that thing could be developed, that I might need to agree with the fact that my relationship might not ever look like a Hallmark movie or what my partner's relationships look like or my friends, right? However, it doesn't mean that I can't still have something. It just may look different. Closeness may not be wearing the same pajamas, and taking family photos. Closeness may be distant or small doses or speaking about surface level topics. And that's okay. And learning to forge a new path with what everyone's capabilities and capacity holds.
Yeah. And that, I think, was what my brain was trying to connect to secure relating, because a secure relating within yourself means that you can have different you can change your expectations of somebody and how you want them to respond to you without it feeling like you're the problem, you're broken, you're not worthy. I think that especially for like anxiously attached, maybe for both, but it, yeah, when you don't have the relationships you want, it often feels like it's because you're not good enough.
Mm.
And so I'm hearing like within the grieving process and the acceptance process and the secure, learning to be more secure in how you relate, and can feel that you are worthy and you are good enough, even if the relationship that you want can't happen.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it is that, like, when you're actually doing the work and you're acknowledging the needs that weren't met and the needs that you currently have, that gives you like a guide, that gives you insight into like how you need to begin showing up for yourself and how you need to begin asking for your needs from others. It's just recognizing that in the past, you may have asked for those needs to be met, right? But perhaps in very insecure ways. And so I kind of liken the transition from insecure to secure patterns to just a series of mini experiments. If I can identify what I need and seek those out from people that have felt historically safe in my life, making sure I'm going to stack the deck. I'm going to start practicing these new behaviors with people that are least likely to cause hurt and pain, right? And the more I get some wind under my belt, I'm able to rewire my expectations. Because those of us who have faced trauma and difficulties, we start to expect that. Yeah. We're like, oh, I'm not even going to ask because I expect them to respond this way.
Yeah.
But we start to rewire that. And then it's also important to recognize like who is safe. Just because maybe a sibling thinks, oh, this aunt or this uncle or this parent, they are my safe space. That doesn't mean that you have to identify them as safe, for yourself.
That's
so I think that was a lot.
No, it's perfect. Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah, I think that that's a little bit of what we were talking about earlier too, of, we don't ask. And then like we're at level 10. To me, I think that that's because we have had years of experience of learning that our first request doesn't get us anywhere. So we just shut down, and then you get to a point where you just have no choice because things are really bad and you have to ask. And usually it comes up as you blowing up or you like doing it in a really insecure way.
Mhm. Yeah, and when we do it in an insecure way, it usually reinforces, like, it brings on the thing that we fear the most. And so, like, if I'm anxiously attached and I'm scared of abandonment, then I might ask for my needs by criticizing my partner and saying, "Hey, like, you never do this for me. Why not? And like, do you really love me?" And da da da. And that's kind of off-putting. Like, instead, let's invite, like, "Hey, I really like doing this. I made plans for us to do it tomorrow." Like, it just will definitely impact the outcomes a lot of times, and then reshape like our expectations. But like, don't get it wrong. Like, secure people experience the same things that insecure people, they're subject to experience it, right? It's just they don't perceive it as threatening as much. They don't they don't see conflict as like, oh my goodness, the relationship is doomed, it's going to fail. It's just like, oh, we had a rough patch. We'll both sleep on it and talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah. And it doesn't feel threatening, which if you're listening to this and you're anxiously attached, you're like, I don't even know what do you mean it doesn't feel threatening?
You better wake up. We got to talk about this now, or we're never going to make it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If this, you're going to leave me tomorrow. We can't get this right now. Yeah. Yeah. That is one of the hardest lessons too, is just learning that like time and space can actually be and usually is good and healing and safe. But it's, when you were a kid, if time and space meant, dad was going to come home yelling and screaming, when he got home from work, then time and space means there's something really bad coming in a few hours or a few days. We don't know what or when. So yeah, the trauma piece of this is really trauma. Trauma doesn't cause your attachment style, but it impacts, like the way it impacts you and is, uh, it can impact you differently depending on your attachment style. And I think that's why one person in the family might find dad really safe and the other person might find dad really dangerous.
I don't know. I think trauma does impact our attachment style.
I think it impacts it, but it doesn't create it from birth. Like, I think that we're born a certain, like, I think I do. I think we're born with an inherent kind of way. And then, because I don't know about your kids, but my kids are like, it feels like I can already tell kind of what their styles are, but then their experiences will impact how secure or insecure or how avoidant or anxious. I think that that epigenetic kind of born a certain way, and then your experiences really add additional impact. That's how I see it. But please,
yeah, no, that's definitely food for thought. I mean, I'm pretty sure we'd be splitting hairs and at the end of it come to like, oh yeah, I totally agree. But yeah, that's definitely something to mull over. I guess like what I'm hearing is that like your children or children in general are born with a predisposition to attach a certain way or another, is what you're saying.
That's how I feel. And then we could definitely split hairs, and some people would say, well, it's, their experience in the womb. And then, but I don't know. I don't care what the,
I mean, can we even prove that?
Yeah,
like, I don't know. And I'm not like a huge researcher, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, no.
I mean, not to that extent, I'm not. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, and watching too, like, I know like different people that I know in my life who have like multiple siblings and all have different relationships with their parents. And I also do a lot of I also conceptualize a lot of things through the Enneagram, not just attachment, but like, oh yeah, that affected you this way because your Enneagram number is this. It's not really about it being like an exact science or like some fatalistic thinking. It's more of just a way for me to like theoretically conceptualize things. And yeah, if you're, for example, if you're avoidantly attached from birth, like you kind of just have a maybe, secure, but a more avoidant style. When dad comes home and like doesn't really say much and he goes straight to the kitchen and starts whatever, and he doesn't really acknowledge you like feel nothing about that. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. Dad's home. He went to the kitchen. Whereas if you're super anxiously attached, it's like, dad didn't say hi to me and he doesn't love me and he doesn't. And so that's kind of how I see that, where it's like two people might not feel the same trauma because they just didn't experience dad's actions the same way.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. I guess I just think that there's still like an origin. I mean, an origin from that. And it really could be a benign, like my dad had to work and like super unavoidable, but how that person interpreted that based on previous conditioning.
Yeah.
And yeah, siblings have totally different parents unless they're twins. Like I feel like
Yeah.
the parent I was to my daughter who's now 7, to my son who's now 3, like it's different because mommy's responsibilities are
Yeah.
a bit different, or mommy's personality might, I don't know if I should say personality, but like, yeah, I mean, I've grown, or like, yeah,
Yeah.
it just may be different. It's the quality that I'm experiencing, or like the work I've done in therapy has produced something different. So
I would agree with that for myself as well. Yeah. And my kids are only 2 years apart, but I still feel like I'm like pretty different between the two.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of baffling. I'm sure that even the gadgets and the things that you could kind of buy even change in that short amount of time. Like, oh, we don't use that anymore. We use this now. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
Or even like the guidance from your pediatrician might have even evolved slightly. Yeah.
Yep. Definitely. Yeah. What else comes up for you around maybe topics in your book, or even if you can think of anything to tie back to like chronic illness and the way that we deal with that based on our attachment styles? Again, knowing that attachment styles can ebb and flow, and there's things. So yeah, anything come up for you around like what you're doing in the book?
For sure. I mean, making that bridge, especially like tailoring it for your audience. We've talked a little bit about how anxious attachment can impact a person with chronic illness. Avoidant attachment may make someone more isolative, or like just not as open with what they're needing, because they want to maintain like a sense of autonomy and independence. And I think about it as like the person, have you ever worked with a client who like went through something horrific, and like you find out months later, like they went MIA, and you're like, are they okay? Like maybe you may check it, and they respond with something like, oh, I'm going through some things, but they don't return it until it's like resolved. And it's like, well, what the heck? Like that's the whole
point of therapy.
Yeah. Or a disorganized person, may at times really, really need the help, but also not want to like sacrifice that independence. And so it may just ebb and flow, which can be kind of confusing for their caregivers. But I also want to flip the script and kind of talk about caregivers or support people identifying their own attachment style and helping them respond helpfully to their person that has a chronic illness. And so someone who's a support person with an anxious attachment style may feel really threatened by anything that makes them feel like not appreciated or like they're not doing enough. An avoidant supporter or caregiver may struggle with like being vulnerable about their own struggles, or about their own needs and whatnot. And then a disorganized, attached supporter or caregiver may at times like oscillate between showing up and being Johnny on the spot and then burnout. And so I think the key for, whichever side you're on, if you are the chronically ill person, or sorry, I should say, if you experience chronic illness, or if you're the supporter, caregiver, it's really about just communicating, being open, being proactive, understanding like your partner's pain points or fears, and really reassuring that. Yeah. If you're supporting someone who really values autonomy and independence, you may ask, like, would it feel better if I just ran errands for you without really talking much about it, or drop off food without lingering around for like extended conversation, so you can kind of still be solo. Or for someone who's just, if you're supporting someone who can have a disorganized attachment, I think having consistent routines that are predictable can be really helpful in calming and easing any fears. But for our caregivers, like really just making sure that you seek out your own support too. Like I urge you to try, even if you felt guilty, to still pursue your own support, your own outlets. You don't have to feel like, well, I'm not going through everything they're going through. Why do I need a break? They're the ones that are going through it. And it's like, no, like this is the long game. They need you to really use your energy as a renewable resource so that you can be consistent for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you don't burn out and you're also taking care of yourself, and that always benefits the whole family. It's like for moms, you know, we need to pour into our kids, and that's normal and natural, and you should be doing that, but you need to be filled up so that you're not just giving and not being filled up in return. And your kids can't fill you up, so you have to get it elsewhere. I mean, they are the joy of your life.
They can be the sole source of your fill up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else come to mind around this that you want to share before we close today?
No, I think we captured it all.
Good. I think so too. Well, thank you for writing this book and for putting it out there. I know people can find it on Amazon. Are there other places people can find it?
Yes, if you want a signed copy, granted, it's going to be sent like super snail mail, if anyone's familiar with media mail. But we do offer signed copies on our website, therapistbestie.com. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Miranda. This was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you learned something new today, consider writing it down in your phone notes or journal and make that new neural pathway light up. Better yet, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram, email me, or leave a voice memo for us to play on the next show. The way you summarize your takeaways can be the perfect little soundbite that someone else might need. And lastly, leaving a review really helps others find this podcast, so please do if you found this episode helpful. And P.S., clicking subscribe ensures you'll be here for the next episode. See you then!